Now, Rod, I'm sure that's not the only one that or the only 2 or 3 that you've been involved with. Anything else come to mind?
There's been a lot of interesting ones. There was an interesting one in Oamaru where a young fellow was out rabbit shooting with his mate, and his mate was 200 odd metres away, on the other side of a way off to the left of the shooter and behind a row of trees, which was probably 20 foot thick. And his mate was hit in the head, and it was obvious to me that he hadn't been directly fired at, because there was only a scalp wound, and that was all it was. But the police had charged the shooter with firing directly at his mate, firing with reckless disregard. I was able to prove that he fired at a rabbit directly in front of him, and the bullet hit a fence wire and ricocheted straight up into the air and off at an angle and dropped onto his friend. As I said, he was over 200 metres away, and struck him in the head. Just an absolute freak accident. But the police had charged him with firing directly at his mate. The interesting thing was that the row of trees was at right angles to the shooter. To fire directly at his mate, the bullet would have had to have travelled through 80 or 90 metres of trees without hitting anything, which is a virtual impossibility because you couldn't see through them. Anyway, I was able to prove that. But the interesting thing was that in all the police evidence that was presented, they never mentioned that there was a hill between the shooter and the person who was hit, and yet they tried to charge him with shooting directly at him. I pointed the fact that there was a hill there out to the lawyer, and he engaged a surveyor, and the surveyor presented all his evidence, and there was 116 feet of hill between the shooter and the victim. So it always pays to contest these things.
Clearly. Anything else spring to mind?
Well, yes, there are several. One of the interesting ones I worked on was the third Barlow trial. And the police, or the prosecution, I suppose, refused to allow me access to the exhibits, which is most unusual because normally when you work on a case, you get the exhibits and you've got to sign for them, and oftentimes there's a policeman present while you're doing the examination just to keep the chain of evidence intact. And in the case of the third Barlow trial, I was prohibited from receiving the exhibits to examine, and I was only allowed 5 minutes in the court without any equipment to examine the evidence and make my observations at that stage, which was woefully inadequate. And at the outset of that was that Barlow was convicted yet again. But that's a case that I have grave doubts about. The reason for that is that there was no physical evidence that connected Barlow with the shooting, none whatsoever. And the whole police case, to my way of thinking, was based entirely upon supposition and vivid imagination. The recovered projectiles were lead, the recovered and .32 calibre. The recovered firearm was .22 calibre. The police's case was that it was, and this is true, it was originally a .32 calibre semi-automatic pistol that they recovered from the dump in Wellington. But it was converted to .22 calibre. The police were maintaining, and that was the basis of their argument, that Barlow had changed the pistol back to .22 calibre before he dumped it. Well, it wasn't that sort of a change. It was a proper conversion that was done on this gun. And whilst it may well have been reversible, it certainly wasn't able to be done instantly. And there was absolutely no evidence that that pistol was used in .32 calibre. It was just pure supposition from the police, and they managed to put up a convincing argument. I was always disturbed by the fact that there was no physical evidence, and I was equally disturbed by the fact that I was prevented from actually examining the exhibits in detail, including the gun. All I was able to do was pick them up in court and have a look at them for 5 minutes and try and figure out the case. I still remain very unhappy with the outcome. I just don't think it was a safe conviction at all.
It seems that the police behaviour was most irregular.
That's, I must admit, is not uncommon in court cases. I've seen quite a lot of it.
Really?
Quite a lot of it. It not deliberate lies or anything like that in a lot of instances, but guilty by omission. They don't tell everybody the full facts because they don't fit their particular argument. They only show those parts that would help to convict somebody, like the case of the shooting in Oamaru, where they failed to mention that it was a hill between the shooter and the victim. The guy couldn't see. You know, it was a physical impossibility. But none of the police evidence mentioned that hill at all.
Yeah.
It's a common thing.
Words fail me.